I'm Tom Aquilone. This session is on how-to low-cost live captioning for webcasting. I work at Lockheed Martin just outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in the Media Services Group, and we do a little bit of webcasting. If you have any questions as we go along, please don't hesitate to ask. If something comes to your mind, we'll answer it right then and there. That'd be great. That happens to be one of our setups where we're doing captioning. A little background. We had a challenge a couple years ago, and that was to reach employees with critical messages at one time. We had a geographically dispersed workforce. Many of you guys probably have the same kind of situation where people are spread all over the place and maybe even over the world. And we wanted our presenters to be able to reach them and also appear like they're speaking directly to participants. So even in the video here, it'd be nice if I was looking at the camera a little bit for those people who are looking at online later on. But we used live and recorded communications, obviously, to allow for time shifting. Something very important in our business was high-resolution slides. We have a lot of engineers, and they love slides with eye charts on them. So if we didn't have high-resolution slides and a live capability, we had a problem. And then lastly, we wanted some way to enhance audience interaction. I think that tends to be the holy grail for many of us. We branded what we used as the Multivision System. Our leaders could brief all managers or all employees directly. Fortunately for us, with the people in our company, they don't all watch at the same time. But they can watch and they can see exactly the same programming and get the same message. Presenters reach the workforce at their desktops or in conference rooms. Participants feel like the presenter is engaging them. And that goes a lot of different ways. You guys are probably well aware of that kind of stuff, so I won't go into that. That's not our topic for today, but it's important that you do that. Critical and time-sensitive information can be delivered to everyone. We already talked about live and pre-recorded and on-demand. Participants are encouraged and can interactively text questions. Presenters can address questions as they come in, and then participants can respond to polls. All those things were important for that challenge. And in a short period of time, looking at different products around the world, we came up with a solution. But then we had a new challenge. Although this philosophy on diversity for Lockheed Martin is not new, it tells us how important the people in our organization are. And if they aren't getting the same message, I think that centers on a lot about what we're going to talk about today. I'm in a portion of Lockheed Martin called IS&GS, Integrated Solutions and Global Services. And it's made up of a very diverse employee population. As good as we thought we were at communicating, guess what? Some employees still did not get critical and time-sensitive information. So we needed a better way to reach out. We have the demographic of how many hearing-impaired folks in our business is not something they share for privacy reasons, but we do know that we have folks out there, and we know that because a lot of them will communicate with us. Do you have a closed caption version of this? Do you have sign language interpreters assigned to this project? Or can they even get a transcript afterwards? So they're very understanding. And this morning's speaker, who spoke about Google Chrome, talked about a very small but important group of people that are served with closed captioning, and in this case, live captioning. So our challenge was reaching the hearing impaired, and we were not desperate because we weren't mandated by the government to do this, but we were trying to come up with solutions. So one thing we tried right away, because it was live with no delays, was to have live simultaneous American Sign Language webcasts. So we'd have our executive vice president talk, and then a link, I'll show you that in a second, but a link to that, as a matter of fact, you can see in the top right corner, it shows two hand symbols. It says, click here for the American Sign Language interpreter. And so this would be the live webcast by an executive, and then if you would click on that link, a whole new player would open up, and in the video window, same slides, same audio, but you would have an American Sign Language interpreter doing sign language in the video window. So it meant that though it was live and there was no delay, there were two whole separate webcasts. So the cost doubled, at least. There were some technical hurdles to overcome. We had to add a URL in that top right corner, add graphics to identify that, because if nobody clicks on it, it's not worthwhile, right? And then afterwards, as we found out, we still needed closed captioning for the rebroadcast. You could still access the American Sign Language webcast, but many people still needed closed captioning because, well, we'll find out. And then the cost. I mentioned that it doubles the cost. It doubles the cost of labor, it doubles the cost of cameras, doubles the cost of bandwidth, all those kind of things. So if you do a simultaneous American Sign Language webcast with a live webcast of your executive vice president or director or manager, you double those costs. So here's an example, and you can see a still image there of what it would look like. And here is a live image. I actually have to press the button. There we go. I have turned off the sound just so we can talk about this. So this is a standard interface for what we use, except that we have an American Sign Language person, interpreter signing in there. We have the same slides as the live presenter who's the executive, and we have a player that has places in it that we can populate graphics and URLs and things like that. But essentially it looks just like what it would look like for somebody who was participating in a regular webcast, not for American Sign Language. So that's the live example. I should say American Sign Language example. So the next thing was, though we tried the live American Sign Language first, captioning was more universal. We still had people that were requesting a transcript or a closed captioning. The hearing impaired employees could get content this way, but not all hearing impaired employees understand American Sign Language. There was a benefit if we went to the closed captioning. If we had people that had any difficulty understanding English, so English as a second language, those viewers would benefit from a captioning solution as well. If you look at just the player here, you can see in the top right corner, you might not be able to read the text, but you can see the big CC. In a normal situation where we're using captioning, and we found that captioning is universal. And this is closed captioning. This is afterwards for a rebroadcast you're seeing right here. We would have a graphic in the top right corner, and it would say this presentation has been captioned for the hearing impaired. Click on the CC below, and you go to the CC below in the player, and then integral to the product we use and to Windows Media Services is a SAMI file with its caption showing up there below. So closed captioning was great because it was viewable in noisy areas, in production areas, in manufacturing areas, things like that. Closed captioning increases comprehension by combining, and you guys probably know this, but audio, video, slides, and the text always helps to reinforce the point. There's a lot of situations where we zone out. You know, we hear something and we don't look at it or whatever. And you know the dynamic of that, but it really does help, and it increases retention and engagement when they're involved that way. Closed captioning is keyword searchable in two ways. With the product that we're using in their webcasts and in their Silverlight interface, I'm going to show you in a second, you can keyword search anything. But also, if you're posting this outside a firewall, this stuff can help people, if you want them to know, right, what you're talking about, what your webcasts are about. Search engines can find it. They can crawl through that material, and they say, oh, who does the research on jet engines? And by finding those words in your closed captioning text, and this is true for many other sources, YouTube and many others out there, they can do that. But here's a way that you can increase your findability, so to speak. Let me click on the keyword searchability. And for this one, I think I'm going to have to put on my glasses. Because I actually have to type something. And, oh, I'm sorry. You know, I missed our closed captioning example. I'll show that right now. And again, you've seen this kind of stuff. You would hear the voice. You see the picture actually moving. and the text that goes along with it beside. If the slides were changing, this presentation only had 10 slides, so obviously during the introduction you won't necessarily see the slides, but that's fully active and working closed captioning after the fact. But I was going to show you the keyword searchable, and in this interface you can go to the hourglass here, and I don't know what he is talking about, but let's see if the word employees is in his material. No results for that. I'm getting close to the end. Let me shoot back to the beginning just so it's actually running when we... Okay. Let's see if the word thank is in here. Thank. So in this case, he shows you, it shows the sentence, I wanted to take a moment to thank you personally, and it shows the time, and if you click on that, it'll actually go to that portion in the presentation. And that, if you could hear it, you'd hear him say, I want to thank you personally. So keyword searchable comes in handy. Let me just make sure I stopped my other demonstrations. Yes, I did. Okay. So with the advantage of captioning, knowing that that's more universal, we were on a crusade. How could we make it live, too? Closed captioning for rebroadcasts. Some live American Sign Language webcasts wound up being closed captioned anyway. Auto transcriptions. Has anybody used any auto transcriptions, either from Premiere, YouTube, a couple other things? Have you guys had any difficulty using them? Context, words that didn't translate. I don't mean translate in different language, didn't translate from the analog, you know. Well, our experience was that it was far from foolproof. We had background noises that the system interpreted as words. We had words that were interpreted as background noises. Of course, typically we won't have music running, but if you do have music, just like you see on the news or a commercial with captioning, it'll say, you know, music in background. Well, it didn't come across that way in auto transcriptions. Acronyms in our business at Lockheed Martin, there's lots of acronyms, acronyms, and that's very difficult to get across. Pronunciation and names is tough too, and of course accents. And when we get into, we're going to talk a little bit more about the cost, but when we get into that, we had in-house folks who were great at typing and doing word processing and things like that. Well, they would spend many hours correcting the automated transcripts. As a matter of fact, almost as many hours as correcting or creating the transcripts in the first place. So, you know, it became painfully obvious. As a matter of fact, we had, and then again, in-house folks spent many hours creating the SAMI files for any transcript. So for an hour's webcast, you know, I think I worked with some really exceptional people, but for an hour's webcast, it was taking 20 to 40 hours of labor to create a complete, perfect, as perfect as we can make it, transcript. Another 20 to 40 hours to create, for an hour-long webcast, the SAMI file. Now, I don't know if that's slow or fast, but it wasn't what's going on out there in the commercial market. So whether you have, anybody ever used student interns to do any captioning? I know I was just at another meeting out in the Midwest, and a lot of higher education people are doing captioning. And we have student interns do it. Well, so they don't care whether it takes 40 hours, 60 hours, 180 hours. They don't pay them any money, or they pay them very little. But the thing actually doesn't get its captioning until a month or two later. So you could be having those student interns do something else with their time. Or if you're paying an employee, look at their hours, right? If somebody earns $20 an hour times 80 hours, I mean, that's a ton of money. Finally, applying the SAMI file to the rebroadcast takes quite a while. And then a small little step, which we have to do with all this stuff, is customize the player with appropriate graphics. And you can see this graphic just below the text. It, again, identifies for closed captioning. Click on the CC symbol below the video window so that you can get that captioning. All this, still we're talking about rebroadcasts. So closed captioning has some drawbacks. It's not live, there's big delays, and there's big costs. And we showed you, actually I did jump ahead. I thought I missed my cue, but you did see the closed captioning example with a live web, not a live web, but a rebroadcast. So this is why you're here, right? Live captioning, low cost, all that kind of stuff. We did a trade study. We talked to a lot of people. There's even some people here that we've talked to about doing live captioning. And, you know, being Lockheed Martin, we have security and firewall regulations. How do we get that information from somebody? We used stenographers we're not far away from the capital of Pennsylvania. Philadelphia isn't. That's Harrisburg. And they have a lot of people that do transcription for courts. And so we tried to arrange something with those folks. Can you help us out? Can you do this? And they use tools similar to what we wound up doing, but they couldn't get through our firewall. The ports they use, the access they need, and all that kind of stuff wasn't available. So standard stenographers didn't help us. But we did find one company, and I'm not going to drop names. If you want to know that, we'll be glad to talk to you about it later and the exact prices and things like that offline. But we found somebody who was, one, interested in the business. They do captioning all over the country, remotely, of course. They have a few locations around the country, but by a phone line or a webcast or some other form of communications, I don't know if they use Next telephones, but some way they can listen into your webcast and they can produce that small window you see on the bottom right. Now that window could be full screen. So you see our standard interface is here. We like to connect them by phone. I'll talk to you about some of those devices in a bit. But we like to connect them by phone because that's immediate. If they can hear the sound from the studio right away, then they're typing at 110 words a minute. And yeah, they do make a few mistakes live. But we also have, as I mentioned, a good number of hearing impaired folks. And we've gotten reviews back from them. And so far, they're very, very pleased with the performance. And it seems like the more we give them information, I'll tell you about that in a bit too, the better they are at helping us do live captioning. So no delay, and that window at the bottom is the fruit of them hearing what's going on. We do some webcasts out there on the www. Most of the time, it's inside our intranet so that captioners can't get out there. But we did have a couple of instances where, for some reason, either our phone connection went bad or whatever, and we quick sent them the URL. If we have an available URL outside the Lockheed Martin intranet, we would notify them anyway. But they got on the webcast on the www and were able to listen and type. But you can imagine there's a 5 to 18 second delay, and then they type, and that's a couple second delay, and it shows up in this window, which you can size any way you like. If you want to cover up the presenters, fine. If you want to cover up the slide, or you can shape it all on the bottom of your desktop, whatever you want to do. It's Java powered. It's not ActiveX powered, which helps us. Our security folks hate ActiveX, and they won't even let it connect. But Java is something. It's a tool that they support and use all the time. So pretty flexible. You get the information very quickly, and it shows up very easily. It doesn't require any special applications. There's some technical issues to it, and that is, you got to have this extra phone line if you're using a phone line for anything else. Just like with the captioning, in the player at the top right corner, you have to add a URL behind that graphic, and then add a graphic that tells our hearing impaired folks, CC, click here for live captioning. And then after the fact, for the same exact price, we get a closed captioning SAMI file that we can apply 2 hours after we're done the live webcast. That's just an incredible specification. You can't use the live captioning anymore. Once it's done, it's done. The Java window's not available. But you can use a SAMI file 2 hours later. We upload a video file to the vendor, and about 2 hours later, they come back with what we call a rough SAMI. And it really is not much different than the live text. And as we mentioned, the accuracy of the live text, the live captioning is pretty darn good. But we have an opportunity to fix that. We also come up with a transcript right away, a rough transcript, so that our communications people, often if it's been a high-level executive or something like that, they want to review it and take chunks out of it for a press release, whatever. So that's available right away, within 2 hours. And lastly, the cost. I mean, if we talked about having 40 or 80 hours of labor to do a 1-hour webcast, this is like, if you take those numbers, that could come up to as high as $3,000. If you talk about somebody's hourly rate and so on, this is under $300 to get live webcasting, a rough SAMI applied right away within 2 hours, transcripts. You review that, you get it back to them, and a couple hours after you give them the reviewed transcript, they have a final SAMI file that you marry to the presentation, you leave it alone, you're all set. So cost, it's at least 10 times less from our experience by doing it this way. So a live captioning example.
Excuse me.
Yes.
So this is a third-party application that you integrate into whatever webcasting solution you have. It's like a JavaScript plugin that is part of your main webcasting application. Is that what the closed captioning?
It's actually even easier than that. It's not an application or a plugin. You don't have to load any software. All it is a URL.
So it's a service. This is a third-party service that provides the link.
Yep.
JavaScript.
Yep, and it's very, very inexpensive. I mean, relatively speaking. I know that, let me just get this right link for you. Actually, we may have lost our network. Let me just check here. Here it is. I'm going to close this window and hit the link again so you can see it spawn. That's what it will look like. Go back to my PowerPoint. So you can see it come up from scratch. This is what our you won't see the loading demo. The loading demo link is something they provide so you can test. We've had situations where we've had updates to Java that have broken Java, and so it doesn't work. But so this is what it looks like. Now you can take that window and you can resize it. Let's see, you can size it any way you want. So you can imagine that the PowerPoint that we're seeing below there is our webcast, and if I wanted to move this around, and you can see the example right on the slide behind it, but and it'll continue to update live. You'll see it at the bottom. I just have to make sure I position myself right. You can see right there at the bottom the text is updating. So by having an outside service do this fast and inexpensive and integrating it with our player, it's not hard. And again, there's no special software. It's not a plugin. Java runs on everything that I've seen. And again, security folks don't dislike it. You do have to have internet access, though. If you don't have internet access, and most of our places at Lockheed do have regular old internet access, that has not been any problem for us at all, even internationally, because we do have some folks around the world, and by seeing the webcast, if they can get our webcast, they can click on the link, they get the internet just fine. So I'm going to close that particular one.
Does that feed have any format to it?
Does that feed have any format to it? What was the last words?
Does the feed have a particular standardized format, or is it just proprietary to the captioning company?
I really can't tell you. I don't know what is behind it, but I've asked a few manufacturers if there's any way that they can incorporate the JavaScript or the Java that comes out of that and put it right into the viewers, and they're talking about that. But I don't know much about what goes behind the code in that or how they describe it. But it doesn't, for me, it does not require any new software or any plugins. It works right away as long as you have Java. Does anybody not use Java out there in the real world? I mean, every browser I've ever seen uses Java.
You mean the full-on Java virtual machine?
No. Well, I guess in truth, it's a Java plugin for your browser, whatever browser you're using. You don't have to have the virtual machine at all. You're right. Good question. Or a good point. So Java works and this works. They told me when we first started doing it, they had some other options. This worked first try, so we never tried what other choices they had. And they have code where you can embed this in a web page if you want to, instead of just have it pop out. But for us, because some of our presentations have slides and some of our presentations do not have slides, we like the flexibility of change in our player, so we didn't want to embed it in a window, we'll let this pop up, and then the hearing impaired person can change it themselves. Let's see. Is the reason I'm using? We use Microsoft, whether it's a WMV or Silverlight, and it does the SAMI file works with that. There's a lot of other flavors, and the company will provide whatever you want after the fact. But the live stream is this JavaScript scripted thing. Does that help you? Well, you know, it's not video, so it doesn't come into the standard, and they can do that, but that's a lot more expensive because then you got to uplink satellites and all this kind of stuff to get to a decoder and an encoder and pass it through the video. So that avoids this whole thing. We looked at that, and that is really, really expensive. It's a good way to do it, you know, if you have the infrastructure to do it, and if you're broadcasters and stuff like that. I mean, that's great, but it's way too expensive. I mean, just the airtime. Okay, so to talk a little bit more about how to, our part is this. We contact the captioning professional, arrange for services. We have a laundry list of what we ask for, and we'll go over that. We provide a phone dial-in for the captioner to listen, make sure that they can hear. Obviously, if they can't hear, they can't make all our hearing impaired folks hear. We send, and this is what I referred to earlier, we send materials to our captioner. It is a tremendous help if we make them a part of our team, and not literally a part of our team, but by sending the presenters, if they have a script, it's rare that we have a script. If you send slides that they have so that they can see some of the names, some of the terminology, stuff like that, that helps a lot. And if they have an outline, often in PowerPoint somebody will have an outline put together and that's all one package. But if you can send that to them beforehand, the more lead time, the better chance they have of using it. And we get the best response from their work when we give them that stuff a week or two ahead of time. Besides sending the materials, of course, and this was true with regular captioning and it was true with the American Sign Language, we have to apply, in this case, a live captioning graphic to our player, and our player has the flexibility of doing that in a couple different places. We've tried to standardize in the top right corner so our hearing impaired folks know where to look there. But there are 3 different places on the player that we can use. And of course, the URL stuck behind it. If you see in the bottom corner, this is what the graphic looks like. It says CC, click here to view live captioning. And then, of course, go live. I don't know about you guys, if you do production, when you hit the button to go live and you make sure the webcast is happening, you make sure the captioning is happening, make sure it's got audio, it's coming through at the right bit rate, that's a wonderful feeling. And I can imagine that when our hearing impaired folks get to see what's going on live, they're getting the same message from our leaders that other employees are getting, they might feel the same way that I do. And this is after the fact. They send us, we upload the SAMI file for closed captioning to the rebroadcast about 2 hours later. We apply a different graphic, and in the bottom right-hand corner you can see that. You've seen that before when we talked about closed captioning. For the closed captioning graphics, and, of course, remove the live captioning URL that's behind there. So what do they do? Once we contact them, tell them what we want, they provide a URL for the live captioning stream, and then we request, and they usually request too, that they have a number to dial into ahead of time. I love talking to everybody involved in a production webcast ahead of time because it gets everyone on the same page. I'm not saying we hold a meeting or anything like that, but once on an important webcast, we will start it 15 minutes to 30 minutes ahead of time with some good advertising stuff, stuff that tells them that they have a good connection, they have sound, slides are moving and all that kind of thing, so that we're not all crashing on the server at the same time. When you have 2,000 to 4,000 people watching your executive vice president, you don't want to be initiating the webcast at the exact same time. It works, but why create a problem? So we start early. We check with the audio with our captioner and make sure they can hear everything, tell them what to expect. You don't have to type this part. This is an advertisement. This is, hey, this is media services, and we want to tell you about how webcasting can help you at Lockheed Martin. That's fine, that's good. And if they really want to do it and they work the little fingers off, but it's tough to do and keep up with during the real webcast. We don't want to have them working a little extra hard. So the captioner dials in early, and then we ask them to stay late. We go back on the audio telecon when they're done, just say, hey, everything went well, no problem. Did you have any problems? Or vice versa. They could tell us, hey, you know, this happened or whatever. We've never had any disasters with them. We did one time on a very important webcast, the vendor's server went down. There was not a catastrophic went down. It just wasn't working. It wasn't sending out the live captioning stream. But we checked that 15 minutes ahead of time, gave them plenty of time to restart their server, and it wasn't even close. I mean, 15 minutes ahead of time, I think they had it restarted in about 5 minutes, and we still had 10 minutes, and we said to the captioner on the phone, hey, type a test. And they said, all good men, now's the time for all good men to come to the other party, and there it was, we were good. So dial in early and stay late. Provide that rough SAMI file within 2 hours of the webcast. I mentioned this briefly, but we produce a WMV file. We upload it to their external FTP site very quickly. We just did one 2 Thursdays ago for our executive vice president that had almost 4,000 people on it. And the vendors turned the rough SAMI over in like 25 minutes. I don't know how they did it so quick, but we uploaded it quick. They got it back to us quick. I wasn't even leaving the room, and I told the communications and public affairs guys that, hey, we're all set with that. And by the way, the captioning's applied. Really? Already? Oh, and you have your transcript that you guys can use. So that was neat. It's nice when a plan comes together. They provide a verbatim transcript within 24 to 48 hours. If you want to pay a little extra, you can get it in 24 hours. But you already have a transcript. Remember, you already have that rough transcript in your hands. Anything for emergencies, there's no reason to pay the extra money. But they'll provide you that. We call it a verbatim transcript because it's word for word. It's not a transcript that's made to sound nice because they're making a public, a press release. It's what they said and the way they said it with the oohs and the ahs and all that kind of stuff. And then our customers review the verbatim transcript, and unfortunately, it takes our customers the longest amount of time to review that to give it the final okay. No longer is it the highest priority that it was when the live event was taking place. But once we're done, about 2 hours later, once we send them the reviewed verbatim transcript, they get back to us with a final SAMI file and a final transcript. And one thing that's really been helpful for us, particularly in the how-to department, is our communications folks would often make the changes in a Word document or text file and send it back to us. Well, that's fine, but if you don't mark your changes, this vendor likes us to any changes highlight in red, and it works great for them. They make the changes very, very quickly. If they have to search through word for word and say, well, they changed something in this line, they changed something in this line, it takes a lot longer to turn it around. So if you're going to ask a vendor to do this or ask even another person to review, have them mark the changes. And then I mentioned already providing the final SAMI file and final transcript. So live captioning hardware. That comes in handy. The technical term for the regular stuff is all the normal stuff for a webcast. You got to have an encoder. You got to have a way of getting audio to it. You got to have microphones, cameras. Again, we always incorporate high-resolution slides in live, so you got to have all that stuff. Any questions about doing a live webcast? I know there's a lot of other people talking about that, right? We all have that down pretty well. Good. So what do you do to get extra sound? In this case, that's an audio DA. You get another program audio out so that it can go somewhere. And then here's some other alternatives. These are some neat gadgets that we've come across. Audio teleconferencing unit for the top of a desktop, that works. If you're in a conference room or a leader's office, they usually have one of these. You plop that somewhere nearby out of camera range, and they can be heard. You dial the number for the captioner, and you're all set. 2 other devices, a hybrid phone patch is in the bottom right-hand corner. Many people manufacture them. DSAN makes a really neat telephone coupler, and Excalibur makes what they call a handy coupler, which is very inexpensive. You hook up to a phone line, any phone that has a handset. You don't even have to know whether you're using a VoIP phone or old POTS line phone or anything like that. It just goes into the handset. You can talk to the person, the captioner or whatever, and say, hey, you on the line? Can you hear me okay? When I push this button, you're going to hear our advertisement at the beginning of the webcast. You push the button, and then you say, I'm going to come back in 10 seconds after I push this button. You come back and you say, did you hear that? And they say, no, I didn't get a thing. And you figure out what that problem is. Or they say, yeah, that sounded fine. So that's the hardware that we have to add. It's very, very inexpensive to get a phone feed. So the bottom line is that it's easy and quick with the right captioning partner, people that are experts at that. We like to think we're experts at webcasting. We like to think that we have the tools, the encoders, the servers, the intranet, Lockheed Martin's intranet, all those tools to do good webcasting. But darn it, we could not do this captioning thing fast enough to make it valuable to our hearing impaired folks. Question?
Do you have an opportunity to review the spelling of jargon, place names, things like that with the provider ahead of the live event?
And that's exactly, it's a good question. The question is, in case this is looked at online, do we have an opportunity to review jargon or acronyms or any special terms ahead of time? Absolutely yes. And that's one of the things that we try to talk about just before the webcast, but that's a really good reason why we try to send a script, an outline, or the slides. Usually the slides have acronyms or people's names. You know, Joe Michaels. Joe Michaels is fine, but if they treat it like Joe is one person and Michael is another, the context is wrong. So yes, the answer is we try to make efforts to do that. And there are some of our presenters that do not. They don't provide the stuff ahead of time. They rush in, they do this, and they do the best job they can, and that's why we have the review cycle of the verbatim material so that we can make it the final. But great question. And again, make them part of your team. Other questions?
Yeah, one quick one.
Sure.
The cost that you're talking about, is that per event or per hour?
It's per hour. So, and the more we use them, the lower the price gets. So, you know, the price we pay is so small compared to what we were doing in labor for people and stuff like that. That's great. And if it just goes a little longer, it's not double the cost. It's only like a third more or something like that. But to be honest with you, I can't think of. We really try to keep our webcasts short because, you know, to keep people's attention and keep them engaged. But the executives try to fight us on that. They have some really important information, so they do go pretty close to an hour. And so that is the rate that we use, and that's pretty common. Question there? Okay, that also is a good question because some of our folks are not as interested. Some of the leaders, some of the people that do our webcasts aren't as interested in helping folks out this way. So we really are fighting a battle. And unfortunately, we were fighting a public relations battle because when we started doing this and we were having American Sign Language and we were doing captioning, the cost was humongous. So they got in their mind that, you know, this is really, really expensive. But in general, we probably do this about 4 times a month. And unfortunately, we probably do, you know, in the course of a year, we do hundreds of webcasts to thousands of our employees. So only a small portion of this group of webcast is getting captioned, but more and more every day because they're seeing how simple it is. Yes, sir?
Well, there's a legality to it also. Just you're much safer if say 100% of your stuff is in the end, you know, as far as the end.
Right, and there's so many other advantages we already talked about.
My government agency just settled a lawsuit a couple years ago, and you know, at any time you might just have one webcast that's not captioned.
Right, and the law regarding this, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't speak to it, but you know, it varies upon your financial situation, the number of your employees, all that kind of stuff. But man, it's just so much easier to do now, and it's so inexpensive. You know, I see us going to be doing more and more of this all the time, and the more we do, these guys said they'll charge us less. Another question.
Being Lockheed, do you guys ever, you know, put any classified or sensitive materials through your webcasts, and how would you kind of approach that situation? Do they give you the option of actually bringing this technology in-house so you have your own staff and run it in their tech?
You mean the captioning technology? You know, we haven't done any classified webcasts. We've had requests about it, and you know, how can we build the infrastructure and all that kind of stuff. But they've never done it. So they haven't even approached captioning in any form. But it's all possible for the right price. And in the government situations these days, we're not getting any more money. And they're canceling contracts, so I don't foresee it happening. But as the other gentleman mentioned, government regulations, things like that, our government customers ask why we don't do it for all of them, because they have to. So, there's that too. Any other questions before we wrap up? We just have a minute left. Yes?
Does your caption provider do all transcription, like taking out, or is there any reason technology?
No, we don't. They offer that service, and we haven't experimented with that yet. We haven't tried to see that, but they have a broad spectrum of products, and we haven't tried it. Anything else? Well, you guys have been great. I really love the questions. If you have anything else, I'd be glad to talk to you. Hope the rest of Streaming Media East goes well for you. Thank you.